Okay, well, we've got three of you back here. Hopefully the other three join us, but they may not come back. We'll go ahead and move on to the next step here so we can continue working on your project here. So the next thing that we're going to work on is putting those parts onto the circuit board, or the printed circuit board. And so let me share with you the printed circuit board. Well, let's see, I can't find, here it is, okay. Okay, so we've soldered the coil, and one thing I didn't talk about was that we do want that insulation close to the terminals there, but not so close that we can't get the solder connection. So hopefully yours looks like that. Okay. And now we're going to solder our components onto the circuit board here. So the circuit board here is the part where we have our electrical traces. The printed circuit board, or we call it the PCB, is where all the electronic components are installed. And we call this the top side that has the white writing on top. That's what we call the silk screen, or the printed side of the circuit board. That's where all the electronics will be installed from the top side. And the little wires from the components will stick through each of the holes in the respective space where they get soldered in. And then we'll solder on the back side, which has the copper traces. So the very first part that we're going to install is going to be the diode. And if you remember reading about the diode a little bit, the diode is what is going to make the electronic circuit like a one-way street. It's going to actually take our voltage that's produced every time the magnet passes through the coil, which is going to be mounted on the tube. It produces an AC waveform, which is kind of looks like a little ripple, okay? We call it a sine wave. It goes positive and it goes negative. And the diode is going to transform that energy into DC voltage, which is direct current, DC, and it's going to make it look like a flat line, and that's what the component here does. And that's kind of some advanced electronics, and you're not probably going to know that very well, but that just gives you kind of some food for thought to think about what that component does. Now, this component does have a little black stripe on the end of it, and it's important that we install that black stripe on our circuit board the correct direction, because this is a polarized device, okay? So if we take that and we bend that into a little U shape or horseshoe like this, okay? The U shape is going to allow us to place it onto our board, and we're going to, again, place it from the top side. And here you can see where the diode gets mounted onto the printed circuit board, the PCB. And when you put that through, you can kind of bend the legs out kind of at an angle, maybe a 45 degrees or so. You don't want to bend them flat, but that allows it to hold it into the board while you work on the board, because you're going to turn it over, the solder on the back side, and you don't want it to drop out on the floor, okay? So that's going to give you kind of a opportunity to get that to mount onto the board there. Now, the other tip that I should share with you here is we want to press the diode all the way down until it's flat against the printed circuit board. If you leave it up a little bit, that would be okay, but we do need to fit everything inside the tube, and so we don't want long leads, and it really works better if it's flat against the board there and supported against the board, okay? So go ahead, and I don't have a picture here of that being soldered into the board, but let me turn it over so we can see the back side here. And here's the back side that we're going to look at. And I'm going to have you install one more component before we go to solder. But if you would like, you can solder now with that component. But the other component that we're going to install is going to be the resistor. So the resistor looks very similar to the diode. And the resistor has these color bands here that give us our value. And we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to bend that into a U shape. and we're going to install that onto the circuit board in the place where the little squiggly line is, the little zigzag line, okay? That's the schematic symbol for a resistor. And so you'll install your resistor, and this one is not polarized, so it doesn't matter which way the device is installed, if it's the red, green, black, or brown stripe, or if it's brown, red, or brown, green, red. So you can install it either way. That one is not polarized, so it's not important that you get it installed one way or the other. And same way, bend the leads out about a 45-degree angle, and that will give you that opportunity to get that installed on the board. And so when you get them both installed there, you should have a board, when you turn it over, to look like this. And we're going to solder around each one of these donuts here. We want to make a complete circle around each one of these. And the solder is going to go where the heat is. So we want to put our soldering iron down here where we're touching both the copper pad, and it's actually a copper pad that's covered with a little bit of solder, so it's shiny silver. And we also want to touch the lead of the component that we're soldering and heat that up. Now here's a pro tip for you. So to make it a little bit easier, since that circuit board is very, very small, you might have a pair of slip joint pliers like this. And if you put a rubber band around the handle here, you can open it up to the widest opening there, and then put that circuit board in there to hold that so it doesn't slide around on your table while you are soldering it, okay? So that will allow you to solder it. And again, here's some little tips for soldering. I've got a tip where I clean the tip of the soldering iron. And this could either be a wet sponge or a wire pad here. This is kind of like a Brillo pad here. The Brillo pad works best if you have one of those, but if you have the wet sponge, you'll want to drag your tip across there, or if you have one of these, poke your tip into the end of there, and it'll clean off any of the extra solder, okay? And then we call it retinning the tip, but what we'll do is we'll touch the solder onto the end of the tip, and it'll make a little wet tip here so that you can have a little bit of solder there to help transfer the heat. And that's called retinning the tip. Okay. And so what we're going to do, here's a picture of us soldering. So we've got a tip of the soldering iron here that it's touching both the copper pad and the little metal lead at the same time. And then the solder will be fed into that joint. So take a moment there, and you've got 4 solder joints to solder together. And everybody gets a chance to give that a try. And let's see, we've got a new member here that's joined us. It says Lemon on my screen here. Are you with us for the first time here?
It's Mitchell.
Okay, great.
I accidentally switched accounts.
That's okay. Just want to make sure that everybody's with us that was here. And Mitchell, how are you doing with your soldering? Are you doing okay?
I'm doing actually really good on it.
Good. And how about Carter? How are you doing?
We're doing pretty good. We're still working on.
Okay. And just let me know if I'm going too fast or too slow for everybody. Okay, and once you get done soldering those 4 connections here, you can see each one of our connections kind of looks like a little mountain with the puddle around the entire circle, and then it goes up the stem. And what we're going to do is we're going to use our side cuts here, the electronic nippers, and cut those off at the very top of those peaks of the mountain. And so you'll cut off all 4 of those wires, and be careful, those do shoot off into the air if you want to hold on to them so they don't take off, and snip each one of those off. Okay, and now our next device that we're going to install here is going to be our LED. That stands for the light emitting diode. And the light emitting diode is a polarized device. So this one we need to make sure to install it correctly in order to let it work correctly or allow it to light up. And if you look down towards from the end of the LED, you can see that there's kind of a flat side on there. And if you can't see it very well, you might run your finger around the edge, but there is a flat side along one part of the base along there. It's also marked by the 2 different lengths of the lead here, okay? So the short lead is on the flat side. So if you can't find the flat side, look for the short lead. The long lead is going to be the positive one, and the short lead is going to be the negative one. And I always remember that by the flat side here is like the negative sign on your polarization. So that's going to be the one that goes into our board here that says LED flat, okay? And the other long lead is going to go into the LED. Now it's important when we mount this that it is mounted onto the board and then bent over the front, because we want it to shine out the front of the flashlight. Normally we would push this straight down on the board, but then it would be pointing 90 degrees the other direction, and might have a hard time fitting that into the tube. And you want to be able to use this like a flashlight. So we're going to bend that over the front edge of the board here and be able to mount it just like that. And once again, once we get this mounted onto the board, and double check that the flat side is on the terminal that's marked LED flat, and that's going to be the short lead. And then we're going to want to solder that into the board. And again, you can kind of spread the leads at a 45-degree angle in order to help hold it in place while you go to solder it. And you can use your pliers again to hold that in place while you solder those 2 connections. And we want to make sure that those 2 connections are individual. They are close together, but there cannot be solder that goes between them. That's what we would call a solder bridge if those 2 terminals would short out or make an electrical connection together by putting too much solder. So just a small amount of solder there. And when you're done, you're going to trim off the leads just like you did before. And you'll see here's the finished product with the 2 soldered connections that are individual there for the LED.
Which one does the short lead go in?
It goes into the LED flat. So the short lead is on the negative side, and that's the LED flat. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, are we ready to move on, or anybody need me to give you some more time? Okay, I'll kind of move on here. And so we're going to get our straw prepared here so that we can mount our coil onto the tube. And so what we want to do is cut a 3-inch piece of that plastic straw that was in your kit. And this is going to be used to hold our magnet and our bumper in place so it doesn't come out as you shake it. There's going to be maybe a lot of force, and so we don't want that to come out of the end of the tube or to press any of the electronics out. And so what we're going to do is we're going to cut about 3 inches, and if you don't have a ruler there, it's about half of the length of that because it's a 6-inch straw, so you can fold it in half and cut a 3-inch piece off. And what we're going to do with that here is we're going to actually need to mount the coil onto our tube first, and we're going to point those wires and the terminals towards the open end of the tube. Okay, so if you want to slide your coil over the end of the tube, you can do that. And then we're going to put that straw through the 2 holes here. And then we're going to take a piece of tape. So you might want to cut off a 3 to 6-inch piece of tape. And you'll bend the straw over and go ahead and tape that straw down flat on the tube. Just 1 wrap of tape around there or 2, just to hold that straw in place and to tape that straw down. You want to be careful though and leave those holes accessible because we're going to need to be able to thread the wire through the holes and put it into the tube to run it out the end of the tube. So don't tape over the holes, just tape over the end of the straw to hold it in place. And once you get that straw taped into place, you can work on getting those wires through the hole and out the end of the tube. And the wires can go through either both wires through one hole, or you can put one wire through one hole and one through the other. It's up to you. You make the decision. And once you get your wires through, this is what it will look like here for you. You will have those wires to come out the end of the open tube there. Also, I'm going to continue to go on as long as I can. The last time I signed out and was saving the video, it said that I could go for 40 minutes and not 30 minutes, but the schedule says 30 minutes. So we'll see if I can continue on. If I need to make another invite, I will. I think my time is up at 8:05, so one more minute, but I hope that we can keep on going. And I'll send another email with an invite if we get disconnected here. Okay, so does everybody have their wires threaded through the tube and hanging out the end? Carter, how are you doing? Are you doing okay?
We're getting there.
Okay. Do I need to slow down a little bit? Or are you guys okay?
We're probably okay.
Okay. Now, once we get the wires through the end of the tube, we're going to install those wires onto the printed circuit board here. And this is going to be how we get the energy from the coil that we're generating with a magnet to get to the circuit board here to power the electronics that's going to light up the light. So there are two holes on your board here that say coil. One is up here in between the diode and the LED, and the other one's down here towards the bottom corner, and it says coil next to the resistor. And you can see the important part is we're going to put one wire through each hole, and we're going to mount that all the way up to the board so the red insulation touches the printed circuit board. You can have it away from the board just a little bit, but we don't want it away too far because we don't want any bare wires to short out on any of the electronic components here on the top side. So press those all the way through here. It does not matter which hole, which wire goes through. You can go through either hole with each wire. And then what we're going to do is turn that over, and we're going to solder those wires on there. Again, when you turn that over, make sure that the wire is still pressed up against there and the insulation is up against the printed circuit board. And again, you're going to solder both of those wires there and then trim them off. So use your pliers there to help hold the board if you need to, and make soldering on those two connections of those two red wires. And when you're soldering, again, make sure you don't want to melt the insulation on the wire. So take about 2 seconds to warm up the connection, add solder, and take 2 seconds maybe, and then remove the soldering iron. So you're probably going to have the soldering iron on your wires for about 3 or 4 seconds, maybe 5 seconds, but probably not much longer than that.
Mm,
Once you get your wires all installed on the printed circuit board, we can do a mid-assembly test here. And the procedures for doing this here is to move the coil between the bumpers and wrap your hand around the coil and hold it to the tube. So you're going to hold it in place while you are shaking the tube gently and make the magnet go back and forth in between the two bumpers. And you can leave the ends of the wires hanging out with the electronics. And you should see every time that every time the magnet passes through the coil, the LED will flash. Okay, so it will blink when you move it one direction, you move the magnet back, move it the other direction. Okay, and it'll flash as you pass the magnet back and forth. If the LED does not blink, we need to look at your soldering connections there, or make sure that the diode and the LED are in fact installed correctly into the circuit board there. There is a little bit of a speed issue there. You need to be able to shake the tube fast enough to make the energy generate. So if you're just like letting it slide through very slowly, it will not let it light up the light. So you'll have to shake it not really fast, but at a fast enough pace. So if it doesn't light up at first, maybe shake it a little bit faster to see. But you shouldn't have to shake it like crazy. Okay, so everybody take an opportunity to hold your coil on your tube and just kind of shake it back and forth. And I've got one right here that you can see. Let me stop my screen sharing so you can see. Okay, so let me grab a coil. My coil doesn't have wires on it, but we put that onto the tube and I just hold it and then I'll just shake it back and forth. And then if I had my circuit out here, you would see the little LED blink. So just kind of hold it and shake it back and forth. Did everybody have success?
We didn't yet.
Okay. Are you still working on soldering?
No, we're still trying to shake it.
Okay. And shake it maybe a little bit quicker and see if the light will blink when you shake it a little bit quicker.
Okay.
And I put some little troubleshooting techniques up here to look at. If your LED does not flash, we want to check each of the solder joints to make sure each of the components is properly soldered to the PCB. Okay, so remember your solder joint should look like a little mountain. So all the way around the circular disc and then up the stem a little bit. So you can see some examples of some good solder joints. If they don't look like these, you may need to reheat them up with your soldering iron and either add a little bit more solder or just heat them up. And then also double check to make sure that the black band is matching with the band on the circuit board here. Where there's a band that matches up with the LED, or I'm sorry, the diode. And the LED, again, the little flat side needs to go on the hole that says LED flat. So there was a flat edge along that LED, and that needs to be installed there properly in order to make the LED flash. Okay, and I think my video is going to end here in just a moment, and probably I'll have to send another invite in order to get everybody started back up again.